yeah, that's what it was actually called. We would call it Rose Cottage. They've been transferred to Rose Cottage, and but yeah, to gain like even quite a few more examples of this, a friend of mine, Christian Lander, who I've had on my podcast before, or at least on my UK Collapse Radio podcast. He made a like quite short video. I think it was like 8 or 9 minutes for YouTube, and it's called "Language Becoming Ever Euphemisms." And he gives quite a lot of these examples of how we've sort of diluted and sterilized our language, to the point where we almost don't really recognize the reality of what we're talking about anymore, But yeah, if you want to find that on YouTube, look for "Language Becoming Ever Euphemisms," and it's a brilliant video that he's done. But back on with the review, around 85% of Oceania's population are comprised of a dumbed down but strangely more free population known as the proles, and that's newspeak for proletariat. The party members are conditioned to perceive them as some kind of debauched underclass that is rife with gambling and drugs and prostitution and porn. However, Winston cannot resist his curiosity for the things that they all take for granted. At a point in the film, he returns to a pawn shop, which sold him the notebook that he uses as his journal. And even though he browses through, items that are clearly junk by today's general standards, he regards them as strange but wonderful oddities. One such oddity he decides to buy for $4, even though this is supposed to be set in England, I think. But he decides to buy a paperweight of a piece of, I think it's a piece of coral encased in a plastic sphere. But neither Winston nor the shopkeeper actually know what it is. Which goes to show how successful the Ministry of Truth has been at being able to rewrite history. One cannot mourn what one is no longer even aware of having intrinsic value. But at this point, a relationship between Winston and another woman who's a member of the party, who we later learn is Julia, begins to develop. The party is, of course, a collective which both regrets, rejects, abhors, and even criminalizes the act of sexual procreation for fear of the positive emotions and health benefits that it brings. There's even a talk that one of the party members gives to another group of party members about the eradication of the orgasm. And some people may think, well, how do the people of the party reproduce? Well, artificial insemination. It considers the women as nothing more than both vessels for insemination and as workers to keep the society going. But because of this kind of conditioning, Winston actually regards her with hatred. He actually hates her. He feels attracted to her because obviously, she is she's not an overly attractive woman as she's described in the book. In the film, the actress who plays her is an attractive woman, but he feels attracted to her, but he hates her because of the conditioning of Ingsoc to have purity, and this is where this sort of has a parallel with the current world in the form of the purity movement, which, by the way, is a Christian movement where the it's the idea that it's mainly for young girls, but it's also for young boys as well, that they will maintain their purity and their virginity until their wedding night, as it were. And if some of you will probably be, a step ahead of me here when I'm going to be mentioning the purity balls. Have you guys heard of these? Yeah, look these up. These things are really, they're eerie, man. They're really, really eerie. Essentially what it is that a young girl pledges her virginity to her father in order for him to protect her virginity, and also to supposedly solidify the father-daughter relationship. But the whole thing is that there's this strange value that if you don't have sex, then somehow you're pure and that you're uncorrupted, because supposedly sex is like this dirty thing, this dirty, evil, sinful, corruptible thing. That, never mind that it's the natural method of procreation for human beings. Yeah, the natural. But somehow, because of Christian conditioning, it's seen as sinful and dirty. And I just really, I just can't tolerate that kind of thing. Why do we make something that is natural and in fact beneficial as dirty? Because the thing, yes, there is problems with sexually transmitted diseases and unprotected sex and all that sort of thing. But the solution to that is not purity, because as I will describe later on, the imposition of purity leads to opposite behaviours. But the solution to the kinds of problems such as sexually transmitted diseases and unplanned pregnancy, the solution lies in relevant sex education. Conditioning people to actually care about the repercussions of sexual activity and truly make intelligent decisions about who we sleep with. When we're more intelligent with our decisions, we don't need to have anything enforced. This is why on one of my UK Collapse Radio podcasts, I called, it was entitled "Age of Consent." If you want to find it, it's on TalkShoe, and the overall show. Podcast show itself is called Adam's Musings. So if you look on Google for TalkShoe and Adam's Musings, you'll find because it was a podcast show that I used to do for UK Collapse Radio. But in one of the episodes, I advocated about the replacement of the idea of the age of consent with an idea that I called the point of consent, where instead of setting an arbitrary, because it is generally arbitrary, the idea of an age of consent, replacing that with essentially the idea that each individual, of their own volition, through their own educational process, they arrive at their own decision as to when they want to engage in sexual activity. Because for some people, like in the UK, the age of consent is 16. But the thing is, some people are ready for sex before then. Some people are never ready for sex. Some people actually develop an asexual orientation in that sense. So therefore, having an age of consent for people like that, it's not applicable. Some people don't want to engage in sex, so for those kinds of people to engage them in sexual activity when they have not reached and surpassed their own point of consent, that is clearly a violation. But that aside, back on with the review, because this is becoming a really long show now, and I'm only part way into it. But in a contrived fall, somewhere in the pathways of the party complex, Julia secretly hands Winston a note, basically saying "I love you," and on the back of it says, Victoria Square, suggesting to meet. The secrecy of such a meeting is obvious, considering the vast array of surveillance methods used to control the party members. Everything from cameras, helicopters, even children are used as spies against potential traitors, mainly in the form of boy/girl scout groups known as the Thought Police. And it's easy to imagine how easily such a society can be maintained when you groom children from an early age to be ever paranoid and ever watchful of the behaviours of others. I mean, there's one scene in the film where Winston is he's fixing the pipe under the sink because there's a guy that he works with called Parsons, and he was fixing his sink, and the boy, he must have only been maybe 9 or 10. The whole time that Winston was fixing the sink, the boy was just standing there staring at him, just like paranoid, like almost as though he's desperately searching for some kind of thought crime, and he even says, "You're a thought criminal." It's almost like a congruence test where you throw something at someone to see whether they are underneath what they appear to be on the surface, and also for something like that, if that kind of accusation comes out of nowhere, if you actually are a thought criminal, then there's generally a certain way that you might react to that kind of accusation. But obviously, if it's not true, then it would just shrug off, and then and obviously it doesn't get heard of again. It's like, "You're a thought criminal," and it's like, and then it just carries on. And it's like, "Yes, you've done a good job, little Timmy. Well done. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you for being a spy for the state." But no, it's strange because after all, one of the last means you would expect to be turned into the authorities for thought crime would be your hawk-eyed children. And because the thing is, in our current society, there are quite a few parallels with this kind of thing. Obviously, it's not as bad in our current society, but it is certainly getting that way in the form of Peter Joseph phrased it in his film Zeitgeist Moving Forward as self-appointed guardians of the status quo, and these are kinds of people that I've interacted with quite a lot, and people who I used to consider part of my social circle, and even some of my close friends, that they would actively watch you and accuse you of not towing the party line, as it were, and they would I mean, obviously there's exaggerated versions of things where people would attack you. I mean, one of the issues that I found that people would attack me is when it comes to issues like crime and punishment and child abuse and things like that, people would come out with their emotionally charged rhetoric, and they'd say, "Oh, you got to string them up, castrate them, some sort of barbaric treatment." And when I would question the efficacy of, because I would ask them questions like, how do we effectively use violence on violent people to teach them non-violence? And purely because I would question the efficacy of the dominant values and the dominant methods of punishment, they would turn around and accuse me of either defending or sympathising with criminals. They would even accuse me, right? There's quite a few instances of where I would, ask people, how does castrating a paedophile solve the problem of paedophilia as a whole? And these people would immediately accuse me of being a paedophile. Yeah, this is the thought police in action in our current society. People think if you're not towing the line of the current, ignorant means of just lashing out at problems and, extracting our pound of flesh, then you are lumped in along with them. The same issue, the same response has come up in issues about terrorism. People have asked me, "Are you a terrorist? Why don't you go and help your terrorist lovers?" People have actually said things like that to me. This is how bad things are getting, because people just become, as Peter Joseph said, they become self-appointed guardians of the status quo, and not just that, but they actually become just like the fucking thought police. It's ridiculous. But another means of surveillance in the world of Oceania is in the form of, as I mentioned earlier, the telescreens. In our current society, we have things like CCTV and the other different devices like iPhones and Facebook and stuff that we and it's almost like a telescreen in of itself. When you're on Facebook, I admit that I'm on Facebook, but I use Facebook as a networking tool and a means of communicating the train of thought that arrives at a natural or resource-based economy. So, if the NSA or GCHQ or PRISM or whatever are accumulating and collating all this information on me, then there's a phrase, I can't remember who actually said it, but it has been bandied around by quite a few different people that so what that the NSA and GCHQ are watching? Good. I hope they learn something. And I would say that I'm also a subscriber to that idea as well, because I don't care if they really are watching me. Because I'm pleased that I can actually communicate, because even then I would be able to communicate a resource-based economic model to governmental employees. So keep listening, guys. That is, if you're listening to this. But back to the whole CCTV thing. One of the main parallels that seems more obvious to most people about how an Orwellian world is coming true is with CCTV. According to, there was a report that was published by the British Security Industry Association, and according to them, there are up to 5.9 million CCTV cameras in the UK alone. I don't know about the stats about other countries, but I'm in the UK, and these are the stats that are more relevant to me. That's one CCTV camera for every 11 people. One camera for every 11 people in this country. In London alone, right, get this, there are 422,000 CCTV cameras. And I think, I'm not entirely sure about this, but I think that makes London the most surveilled city on the planet. I think there's probably only one other place that almost rivals that number, and I think that's the Vatican City. But that's a sovereign state in of itself. But no, but for those of you who might be a little bit ahead of me, you may be thinking of that old house of George Orwell, 22 Portobello Road in London, where there's that plaque on the side of the building with a CCTV camera in front of it. No. Contrary to popular belief, there actually isn't a CCTV camera there. It's fake, right? So, it's I guess there's a silver lining to every cloud. But anyway, on with the review. Another means by which the party members are controlled is the continual reminder of warfare outside of the city bounds, supposedly being fought against those other nation states to maintain their way of life. Said wars are not propagated to be won. They are to be sustained, with deceptive periodical reminders that such wars are, quote, within measurable distance of its end, end quote, thus giving the illusion that we are almost safe, but not quite. Keep spinning this lie and society will continually be kept in a state of hopeful anticipation, but like a donkey being spurred on by that carrot at the end of the stick, it always seems that carrot is always just outside of its reach, enabling it to always think that it's almost there. And I'd say the main equivalent in our current society is the war of terror. The war on terror. I'd tell you that's one thing that's one subtle thing that I loved about the Borat movie where he goes. I think he goes to a rodeo or something, and he speaks on the microphone in front of all these thousands of people, and he says, "We in Kazakhstan support your war of terror." Because it's strange that the idea of the war on terror is supposedly, some sort of active campaign to stamp out and or eradicate terrorism itself. But the thing is, not a lot of people realise that the means by which we are educated about this so-called war is actually an act of terrorism in and of itself. That's why Sacha Baron Cohen, put in that little subtle thing, because it is a war of terror. If you want to feel the idea of terrorism is to incite terror in the minds of a population. And what is the effect of watching an average news program? You feel terrified, right? This is one of the reasons why I don't pay as much attention to the news anymore. I mean, I pay some attention because obviously I like to keep abreast of the kind of things that they're trying to fucking sell people. But personally, I don't buy into it anymore. But I can, every time that I expose myself to it, I picture how scared it must make so many people feel. I picture how hopeless it must make people feel that, there's the threats to our world is like Ebola virus and immigrants and ISIS and benefit cheats and all these MP expenses scandal, which, by the way, nothing can be done about, as as long as you believe the official party line. All these politicians, they're screwing you out of your tax money. Taxes, which, by the way, are a form of theft. But yeah, I mean, look at these awful politicians. They're doing all this awful stuff, but make sure you vote for them. But yeah, I mean, the whole idea of this so-called war on terror is to be sustained. The enemy image of our current society is these terrorists. I mean, before, at one point it was supposed to be the Taliban, then it was supposed to be Al-Qaeda, now it's ISIS. I wonder what the next boogeyman's going to be, because that's essentially all it is. It's the creation of loads of different boogeymen that seem elusive and unthwartable, but we are trying to thwart them. But as the book and the film describes, it's not a war that's meant to be won. It's meant to be, as the book says, it's meant to be continuous, to be sustained. as long as the mainstream media holds sway and keeps us in, thinking in this little box, they will not advocate or, support the idea that, wars should be won and resolved and harmony between human beings to be accomplished. It's all about, maintaining an enemy image, for a society. In order, I can't remember I think it was a political theorist or something that said that in order to have a society, you must have to have an enemy image. I can't remember who exactly said that, but yeah, I mean that's what this is all about. Having a society that is that has all these different enemies, always raging like barbarians at the gates. And we the political stronghold are keeping those barbarians at bay and protecting you, and so thus you must love us because we are protecting you from those barbarians at the gate. Never mind that those barbarians at the gates are actually at the gates as a retaliation for the aggressive, illegal and deceptive foreign policy of stealing their resources and bombing their children and destroying their lives and militarily occupying their countries. Never mind that they're coming to us as a retaliation. We call them terrorists purely because they're retaliating for our acts of terrorism against them. Never mind that they're the terrorists, we're the good guys. We need to eradicate them, but not completely eradicate them, because if we were to eradicate them, then we'll have to come up with another boogeyman to keep you scared and afraid and dependent upon Big Brother. But anyway, sorry about that. But on with the review. There's a part in the film where there's like quite a few truckloads of soldiers from supposedly from East Asia that are brought in to the party city, and the prisoners of this war that are captured and presented to the party members as tokens of the victory, the spoils of war, reduced from human beings into things to be killed with numbers hung around their necks, which are paraded as seeming evidence that headway is being made, and to be almost ceremoniously executed in front of patriotic, raging, screaming, cheering party members. The message is hard and clear. This is the power of Oceania. We are winning. And here are those evil people who wish to take away your lives and freedom. It's hard to say what those enemy soldiers must have thought of the blind rage and bloodlust that the party members consider them with. Are they aware of the sheer degree of propaganda that the party has been drenched in? Do they have their own propaganda that is saying the exact same things about Oceania? Or are these soldiers nothing more than dissidents of Oceania itself, or mere proles that an unthinking crowd believe are the enemy because Big Brother has told them so? Sometimes the questions of what don't even matter, since the end is just the same. But Winston and Julia, they meet outside the city in the countryside, where they both actively denounce the ideology of purity, and they make love out in the open, an act which she proudly admits she is engaged in hundreds of times. It's strange that, to watch the small bit of dialogue before they have sex, where Winston says that he hates purity, that he wishes that it didn't exist. And he asked, do you enjoy this sort of thing? And there's no slut shaming between them. I mean, normally, because slut shaming is something that women will be all too familiar with. There's the double standard that if a man sleeps with loads of women, then he's deemed as a stud and he's commended for it. But if a woman sleeps with loads of men, then she's deemed as a slut and demonized for it. I mean, in part I'd say that is a bit unfair, but in part I would say that is completely fair. I mean, not that I'm not saying that slut shaming is fair, but I'm saying that, you know, if in